My name's Stephen Romay. I'm the literary editor of the Australian newspaper, and I'm very pleased today to be here with the American novelist Jesmyn Ward, author of Salvage The Bones, which last year won the US National Book Award for fiction. This is Jesmyn's first visit to Australia, and she's been so busy in the past few days doing this sort of thing that hasn't even seen a koala.
No.
Or any other sort of, Australian wildlife.
No.
And because it is her first visit, I know we normally keep the applause for the end, but I thought we might try to make her welcome in the usual way. What we're going to do today is I'm just going to briefly introduce Jesmyn, talk a little bit about her book, then she's going to do a brief reading from it, and then we'll have a discussion, and then about 20 minutes from the end we'll take some questions from the audience, which is always a highlight, I think. Salvage the Bones is Jesmyn's second novel. It unfolds over 12 days as Hurricane Katrina approaches and then devastates a poor rural community on the Mississippi Gulf Coast. The central characters are a girl, Esh, her three brothers, and their father. And it's a very moving novel. I'm sure anyone who's read it will agree with that. The place where these people live, as I said, is very poor, and it's well described in the book as a place where everything is starving, fighting, struggling. And Jesmyn grew up in a place like this. So I think we'll start now with the reading.
Okay. So I'm probably going to disorient you a little because I'm going to read a bit from the hurricane chapter, which is the 11th chapter in the book. So let's see. So the book is narrated by Esh. She's 15 years old. She's pregnant. She's the only girl, she's the only girl in this world of men. So she lives with her father, her oldest brother, Randall, who attempts to be sort of a caretaker to the family, and then her older brother, Skeeta, who has a white pit bull named China that gave birth to a litter of puppies, or that at the beginning of the book, and then her youngest brother, Junior, and he's 7, and so that's the brother that her sort of mother died, while giving birth to. And so I just wanted to give you a general idea of the characters before I dump you in the 11th chapter. And so basically, Hurricane Katrina has made landfall, and it has, the characters didn't evacuate for the storm, and they're in their house, and the house has begun to flood. The snake has swallowed the whole yard and is opening its jaw under the house. Open the attic, Daddy says. The water is lapping the backs of my knees. It's stuck, Randall says. He is pulling at the string that hangs from the door of the attic, which is in the ceiling of the hallway. Move, says Skeeta. The water is tonguing its way up my thighs. Skeeta hands me the puppy's bucket. Hurry, Randall says. The 3 puppies squeal little yips that sound like whispered barks. These are their first words. Pull down, Daddy says. He frowns, holds his hand up like he is pulling the cord. The water slides past my crotch, and I jump. All right, Skeet yells. He pulls himself up on the cord like he is swinging from a rope in a tree, and the attic door groans downward. Up, Randall says, and he is shoving Junior up the ladder into the attic. China is swimming next to Skeeta, her head bobbing like a boy. Go, Skeeta says, and he pushes me toward the ladder. I float on the water, my toes dragging on the hallway carpet. He grabs my back and steadies me as I slog into the attic with the bucket. Esh, Junior says. I'm here. Junior's eyes are white in the dark. The wind beats the roof, and it creaks. Randall is next, then Daddy, and last, Skeeta and China. I cup the bucket with my knees, sit on a pile of boxes, fish out a broken ornament that is digging into my thigh. Christmas decorations. Randall is sitting on an old chainsaw, Junior cowering next to him. Daddy takes out the package he put in his pants after the tree fell into his room. It is a clear plastic bag. He opens the packet, pulls out pictures. Just before Skeeta pulls shut the attic door, seals us in darkness, Daddy makes as if he would touch one of the pictures, hesitant, as lightly as if he is dislodging an eyelash, but his glistening fingers stop short, and he wraps the pictures again and puts them in his pants. Mama. The attic door moans shut. The roof is thin. We can hear every fumbling rush of the wind, every torrent of rain, and it is so dark that we cannot see each other, but we hear China barking, and her bark sounds like a fat dog's, so deep, like dense cloth ripping. Quiet, China, Skeeta says, and China shuts her jaw so quickly and so hard I can hear the click of her teeth shuddering together. The house, Randall says, and his voice is steady, calm, but I can hardly contain the panic I feel when the house tilts, slowly as an unmoored boat. It's the water, Skeeta says. It's the water. Shit, Daddy yells, and then we are all bracing in the dark as the house tilts again. Water, I say? It never came back here, Daddy breathes. The damn creek. Daddy, I say, and I'm surprised at how clear my voice is, how solid, how sure, like a hand that can be held in the dark. Water's in the attic. The water is faster this time. It wraps liquid fingers around my toes, my ankles, begins creeping up my calves. This is a fast seduction. The wind howls. There was a family, Randall says. We know, Daddy says. 14 of them drowned in Camille, in their attic. The house lifts up off of its bricks again and rocks. We're not drowning in this fucking attic, Skeet says, and I hear a banging again and again. I look up and debris falls in my eyes. He is beating at the inside of the roof. He is making a way. Thank you.
Thanks very much. That chapter on the hurricane hitting is just extraordinary. I read it in one sort of terrified gulp at the time. The idea of drowning in your own attic is extraordinary. Now, you of course lived through Katrina yourself. Would you like to share with us, please, your experiences on that day?
So I was on the Gulf Coast of Mississippi. I was in my hometown in DeLille for Hurricane Katrina. I wasn't supposed to be. I was supposed to be in Ann Arbor, Michigan, because I had just completed an MFA program at Michigan, and then I had been hired on to teach for the next academic year. So I was supposed to be, in Michigan. But then I thought, well, I don't want to leave my family with this hurricane coming because it's not veering off, and it seems like it's it's hitting us sort of head on, and I knew that I'd be worried about them. So I stayed, and I thought, well, I'll stay here, for the hurricane, and then after the hurricane, then I'll leave and I'll go to Michigan. So from the very beginning, I was underestimating the storm. And then we weren't aware that it was a Category 5 hurricane until the night before it hit, before it made landfall. Because I think that's when, I don't know, when the scientist or the meteorologist or whoever, figures those things out, figured out that it had increased to a Category 5. And so, my family's never evacuated for any storms, and they're much, they're like the family in the book. I mean, I'm related to a lot of people, to almost everyone in my entire town, which means that that evacuating is too expensive. It's much too expensive to evacuate, your entire family when there's like 100 of you, right? So we've never evacuated. We always, there are things that we do to prepare for the hurricane. Like collecting water and boarding everything up, and collecting canned goods, and just whatever we can do to make surviving the hurricane easier. So anyhow, we'd done all of that, and then and we went to my grandmother's house because she has a brick house, and a brick house that had never flooded before in any of the hurricanes that we'd that we'd been in. And so we thought, well, we'll just go to her house for the hurricane. We'll be fine. And so I woke up at 6 a.m. in the morning, and my sister said, "Did you hear that?" And I said, "Did I hear what?" And she said, "The wind. Like it sounded like a train." And my mother had told us that when we were little, that when Hurricane Camille hit in 1969, that's what the wind sounded like. I mean, Hurricane Camille was the last Category 5 hurricane to hit the Gulf Coast, and she said that's what it sounded like. The wind sounded like a train's whistle, right? And I thought, and so when my sister said that, I thought she's exaggerating. I didn't hear that. I don't know what she's talking about. And so we were okay for a few hours. I'd say maybe 2 hours. We were in the house. We were fine. We were watching the wind, sort of, break all the trees that we could see. It also, while we were in the house, it made a tree sort of fall on the roof. And so that damaged part of the roof. But, when you're in the middle of a hurricane, there's nothing you do about that. And we thought we were okay. We thought we'll stay here, till the storm ends. And then water started coming in the house. And I remember my grandmother sort of looking at us, as the water rose really quickly, and I thought, when I first saw the water coming up through the floor, that's what I thought. I thought someone had spilled a cup of water on the floor because it was just a splash. And I was like, what, who spilled a cup of water on the floor? And then all of a sudden, all the carpet was damp. And then the water just kept sort of steadily sort of rising. And then my grandma's books are sort of floating in the water. And then her sofa lifts up. And then we realized that this water is coming up really quick. I mean, wherever this water is coming from, it's coming really quickly. And my grandma, she was just, her mouth was open and she couldn't even say anything because she, that had never happened before. And later what we learned is that, Hurricane Katrina was such a large storm and so powerful, and it moved so slowly that the storm surge that it created meant that it pushed water into places that it had never pushed water before. And so the water was coming up so quickly, that, when in the book, when the characters say that a family, that all of them drowned in an attic, that actually happened, except they were in a church, and they climbed up into the rafters of the church, and they all drowned in the church, and there were more of them. There were 14 of them actually that drowned in Hurricane Camille in that church. And so my grandmother's house is a one-story house, and we didn't want to climb into the attic and drown in the attic. And so we swam out into the storm. We didn't have a choice, right? So we swam out into the storm, and some of our cars, I think there were six cars outside, 3 pickup trucks, and 3 sort of normal cars. All of our the normal cars, the automobiles, they'd been swept away by the storm surge. They were spinning in the water. But the trucks hadn't, because they're higher up off the ground. And so we all climbed into the trucks. One of the trucks was able to get through the water, because the water's steady sort of rushing in. So one of the trucks was able to sort of get through the water that was rushing in and get a little further down the road. But the truck that I was in and the other truck, the two trucks that we were in, they weren't so lucky. We weren't able to get down the road, and we can see as my uncle who was driving that truck, as he's driving through the water, the truck is lifting up off the ground, and the water's lifting it up off the ground, and it's wavering through the water, and so we knew that we shouldn't even try it, and so we pulled into this high field, right? Because we couldn't get very far off the road. We got I don't know, some feet down the road, and then we pulled into this high field. And so the entire road is sort of blocked by this water rushing in this flood, and then, down trees and power lines. And of course, you still have to think about the fact that the wind is snapping everything in two and uprooting things. And so we sat in that field for a while, and there's a family, they owned that, their house was in that field. And they had all their trucks and trailers, because it was a high field. They had all their trucks and trailers. They had a Mardi Gras float in the field. And so they came out to check. They were a white family. They came out to check on their cars, on their trucks. And they saw us, in our trucks sitting in their field. And so they came to our door, and we opened the door, and they said, well, you can stay in this field until the storm dies down a little bit, but you can't come in the house because we don't have any room in the house. And keep in mind that they were telling us this, and there were 6 people in the truck that I was in. 2 of them were my elderly grandparents, and 2 of them, then one of them was my sister, my younger sister, who at the time was 8 months pregnant. And they told us we couldn't come into their house, like we could. And I remember thinking at the time, they don't even have any room for us to stand in their house, so that we can live.
Because you did think you would die.
Yeah, I did. Because the wind was so strong that it was rocking the truck. It was like picking up the truck, and rocking the truck, right? And so I'm thinking, we're all gonna die because the wind is gonna pick up the truck and it's gonna flip the truck over. And then I thought, when that didn't happen, I thought the wind is gonna lift up a tree, and the tree will, get swept along by the wind, and the tree is going to crash into the truck, or a power line, a power pole, right? That will happen, right? It's going to smash into the truck, and we're all going to die. But we didn't. We sat in that field, and we watched the hurricane basically rip the world apart, because that's what it did. And we sat in the field long enough so that we could see that the water was going down a little bit. And the reason that we knew that it had receded a bit is because my car actually was sort of face down in this ditch, and just the tip of the trunk was sticking out when the water was at its height, right? And then we could tell that the water had receded a bit because we could see more of the car. So once it went down a little bit, we decided we'd try to drive a little way, sort of further. We were trying to get to the local church because my grandma had a key. She knew we could get in there and get, find shelter from the storm. But so we got back on the road, right? And so we're driving through the flood water, and we make it as far as the intersection, which is maybe like a quarter mile up. And then we see my uncle, who'd gotten through the flood earlier. We see him and all these people on this porch on a house on the intersection waving at us, and we can't go any further anyway because the roads are just, blocked with trees and power lines and just debris and cars and parts of roofs and all this other kind of stuff. And so they waved us into the house, and so that's what we did. We parked our trucks and then went into the house. And another white family owned that house, but they'd actually been going out in the storm in this little itty-bitty boat with a single motor on the back. And they'd been taking that boat out closer to the houses that are closer to the bayou and closer to the bay in DeLille, and picking people up, who lived in those houses. And these houses had been completely submerged by the water. And so these people were like clinging to trees, they climbed trees and were clinging to trees and trying not to get swept away by the water, by the force of the water that was coming in. So they'd been picking up those people in boats, and they'd actually picked my uncle up, and my sister, my nephews, and my uncle's wife. They'd picked them up in that boat earlier. And so, they were offering shelter to anybody that needed it. And so that's what they did. They waved us into the house, we went to the house, and that's where we sat until the end of the storm.
Yeah, it's worth remembering that this storm did kill more than 1,800 people, so that's the sort of disaster we're talking about. Mm-hmm. So that's interesting that one white family turned you away, mm-hmm. and another white family was rescuing people, mm-hmm. and I think that first experience of being turned away, and then the subsequent experiences you had in the aftermath of Katrina, particularly when you travelled in New Orleans, mm-hmm. seeing how people were being treated and the government response has sort of made you angry about suggestions that America has somehow entered a post-racial era. You just don't see that to be the case, do you?
No, not at all. I mean, I think that people would like to believe that because because our president is black, or considers himself, to be African American, right? Even though he's mixed race, but I don't think that that's the case. I mean, it felt for a minute, for a miraculous moment, after the night that he was elected, it felt like that. It felt like maybe we lived in a post-racial America, like maybe we live in a place where race doesn't matter. But then, then I thought about my experience in Hurricane Katrina, and then I thought about, what happened afterwards in New Orleans, and then the sort of attitudes that I encountered from different people who had awful things to say about Katrina survivors and people that didn't evacuate and people that returned, home. And then even today with, I don't know if you all know about this, but with the case of Trayvon Martin, the teenager that was shot by the neighborhood, watch captain in Florida, shot and killed. And then the neighborhood watch captain just wasn't, the police picked him up and then they let him go. And they wouldn't have picked him up if again, and actually charged him with the crime that I think that he committed. If Trayvon Martin's parents hadn't said, this was our child, he was important, he was a human being, he deserves justice, and sort of raised that public outcry. Like, I don't think that he would have been picked up, without the power of social media. So, yeah, I definitely disagree. I don't think that we live in a post-racial America, and because I see the way that I see the inequality, and it's sort of institutional racism. I feel like I see it every day, and I think that Americans are quick to forget that history is present, and that we live with history, and that history exerts itself in every moment, of our lives. And I think that I don't know if that's a particular, that's an American thing, like that's amnesia when it comes to realizing that, but I think we definitely forget.
And of course, you live in the South. You live in Delisle, where you grew up.
Yeah.
Building a house, I hear, on a hill.
Yeah. Yes, on a hill. My grandmother's house, we didn't realize it until it began flooding, but my grandmother's house is in a little dip, like a little valley. And then that house where the high field was, of course they're on a little hill, so they build on a hill.
It is a different experience, obviously, living in the South, isn't it?
It is. It is. And I have conversations with myself. I talk to myself, but I have conversations with myself about it because when I graduated high school and went away to university, I wanted to escape all of that. I grew up in a town where my town. I could see the way that sort of institutionalized racism and that history sort of bore down on the town and really limited the choices that people had in their lives, right? And like in the way that so cycles of poverty sort of expressed themselves and limited people and really sort of decimated the community. I could see that, but then at the same time, I was also attending a sort of wealthy private school, and I was a scholarship kid. And the reason that I was able to attend that school is because my mom worked as a maid for a wealthy family, and they saw that I was a smart kid and saw that I was having trouble in school, and so they offered to, give me a scholarship to go to the school that their children attended, right? Which was great. It was a wonderful opportunity, and it helped me get where I am today. But for most of the years that I attended that school, I was the only black girl in the entire school, which meant that, that I was the only black, girl in this school, and I was surrounded by kids who were sort of white and wealthy, and just, wore a sense of entitlement like a piece of clothing, and some of them were racist. And they did awful things to me while I was, while I was there, in that school, and sort of, made me realize from a very early age that, there's much about the South that I hate, and about that culture that I dislike, and so that's why I wanted to get away. But I feel like, as when I'm coming back as an adult, that part of what I want to do with my fiction, is I want to write about the kind of people that I grew up with, and then kind of people that are in my family, in this, sort of poor, working class, sort of black rural community. I want to write about those people, and I want them to just live as well as they can and as fully as they can as human beings on the page. So that maybe, kids like the kind that I went to school with, who had very backwards ideas about who I was and where I came from, and who I think in some ways thought that I was less than human. So if those kids pick up my book, they have to see our humanity. If they read it, they have to see our humanity. They have to see us as human beings, and they have to see that our lives are, as important and as real and as vivid and as fraught as theirs are. And I'm hoping to affect some kind of change in that way.
I think anyone who reads your book will think you're having some success in that.
Thank you.
So you survived Katrina, yet it took you quite a long time to write about it. And there's a line in the novel, in fact, where the children are remembering a few days before the hurricane hit, and this is after the hurricane now, and they say, "I wonder where the world, when that happened, has gone, this pre-hurricane experience, because we are not in it." And I think you said to me earlier that one of the reasons it took you so long to write about this was because it did destroy the world you loved, and that hurt.
Mm-hmm. It did. I mean, my experience in the hurricane, right? I mean, I was outside in the hurricane, and I was outside in it, in an automobile, and so I couldn't hide, and I watched as it ripped the world away, as it unmade everything that I loved about the place where I'm from, as far as the physical landscape went, right? And then on top of that, when FEMA, which is like the federal agency that deals with that comes in after natural disasters and attempts to help the people that are there. When FEMA comes in, what FEMA does is that they to ask Katrina, survivors of natural disasters, or they offer them the chance to move somewhere else, right? And so they either want to resettle you in, say Atlanta, Georgia, or Houston, Texas, or, St. Louis, or, any of these other cities in the United States. So not only did I see that the hurricane could like rip apart the landscape that I loved, right? Unmake that home. It could also rip apart my community. And that deeply affected me. I was, and I didn't realize it until after the fact, until I was working on, maybe until I finished Salvage the Bones, and people began asking me about it. And I thought about the fact that I didn't write for 2.5 years after Katrina occurred. And then I realized that that's why, because even though there's much that I dislike about the South, there's so much that I love about home too. I mean, that's my home. That's where I feel, that's where I belong. That's where I feel I have a place, And so my experience of Hurricane Katrina made me feel like that home, like I lost all that, and like I had no home. And that was a very alien and horrible thing, for me to feel. And I think that it robbed me of hope. After it happened, I couldn't, I thought, well, just as quickly as that, everything that I love can be taken away from me. And then it wasn't until I saw, 2.5 years later, that I saw that people people that had left were returning, and that the people that remained there were rebuilding, and that the natural landscape was coming back, and that's when I realized, well, yes, the home that I loved is gone, that world is gone, but that doesn't mean that I don't have a home. I still have a home. It'll just be a new home, and it was only when I realized that I could sit down and write something new.
And did you have a sense, whilst you were writing, that you were also able to remember this home that you loved by putting it on the page?
Definitely. I think that's why most of the book occurs before Hurricane Katrina hits, because I think that I needed that. I needed to be in that place on the page and be there for 200 pages. And so it was. Sometimes I feel like it was an indulgence on my part, that I was sort of given the ability to do that. But then also too, I think, for people from home, who lived through this, that read this book, like I hope to give them, I hope that they're able to have that experience too as well, right? To see something of the home that was before, and just be there for however long it takes them to read the book.
It's this story you described it as a story of a girl growing up in a world of men. It's Esh, her 3 brothers, her father, the father of the unborn child. Your own family, though, was more of a matriarchy, I understand. So what was it that interested you in writing about a girl growing up in the world of men?
I think because her experience was such the opposite of my experience. Because my experience, and I think the experience of most of the young women that I know, is that they do sort of grow up in matriarchies, in these matriarchal families in DeLille, because the women are really the ones that hold the family together. My grandmother and her sisters, and their kids, and then their kids, and then their kids, right? They are the ones that that bring us together on holidays, and then even if it isn't holidays, and and just sort of every day, just a random weekend, we'll all come together. And so I grew up in that kind of environment, and I never lacked for role models, to inform me about what it means to be a woman, or what it means to be a mother. And so I think that I was really interested in writing about a girl who grows up in a world full of men, because it was so opposite to my experience, and because I wanted to figure out, if she lived in this isolated place, and if she only had all these young men around her, her brothers, her dad, and then her brothers, even her brothers' friends, where would she look to find these models for motherhood and for womanhood? And I think that led me to very interesting places, and led her to very interesting places in the book, because she looks to her brother's pit bull, right? She looks to the hurricane, and then she looks to like Greek mythology, and then she looks to the ghost of her dead mother. So I think that set of circumstances was very fruitful, and there was a lot of drama sort of inherent there. So that's why I wanted to write about that.
You draw these young men very well, and they do range in age from sort of 7 up to the sort of late teens. So, where did you get them from?
I have one brother, right? But when I was growing up, it just so happened that where we lived for a good amount of time when I was growing up, we moved around a lot, but specifically in this part of DeLille where we lived, it just so happened that most times I was the only girl sort of in the neighborhood at the time. And then all of my friends, and some of them were cousins, they were all little boys. And they, they taught me, I remember them teaching me how to ride my bike when I was 7. And they were just, I remember that they were horrified that I was 7 years old and didn't know how to ride a bike yet. It was way too late, to learn how to ride a bike. And so I remember there's like a pack of boys and then me, and them pushing me, sort of one sitting behind me on the banana seat and the other, and like 5 of them are pushing and running along with the bike, and then there's like 3 running behind and yelling, "Let go, look up, pedal." And so that's like the environment that I grew up in as a kid. Like I grew up around a lot of young black men, and I think I drew from that experience to really, to explore that world, I think, and to make those young men as sort of, as masculine and as real as I could make them.
They're very interesting young men. I mean, they defy the sort of stereotype of, the baseball cap wearing, jeans down and around their thighs, sort of black American youth. They're much more complex than that, aren't they?
Yeah, and that's what I, wanted to accomplish in this, in this book. I think the character that comes the closest to embodying us, or comes the closest to maybe embodying a stereotype, is Manny, and he was a difficult character for me to write because I knew that he did, but there was so much. I mean, he was who he was, but I still had to write about him in some kind of, in a way that he would still be human, that he would like exhibit sort of the full range, the full spectrum of human emotions. So, I mean, he can be an evil person, but I felt like there had to be something redeeming about him. And so I had to find that, and it took me a while. I had to find that when I was writing this. But, that's sort of what I try to do with all the characters, just have them exhibit sort of the full range of human emotion and of humanity as they could. Because I don't want them to be, I don't want them to be stereotypical. That's not, I don't want that at all. I want them to be as human as they can possibly be.
And I mean, while it is a book about a girl growing up in a world of men, it seems to me at least that motherhood is a massive theme in this book. As you mentioned, the Skeet's pit bull, China, at the start of the book, gives birth to a litter of puppies. And she is an extraordinary mother. In one point, she kills one of the pups. At another point in the book, she fights the father of the pups. And you have the absent mother, the mother who died, giving birth to the youngest boy, Junior. And towards the end, you in fact directly call Katrina a mother we will remember until the next mother, with large, merciless hands committed to blood, comes. Can we just discuss that a little bit, please? Your feelings about motherhood and, the symbol of the mother in the novel?
Well, I think that that had to be sort of Esh's chief concern. Like for her, being a woman or being female and then being a mother, that necessarily those are very closely tied together and sort of intertwined, right? And I just think that in that place and in those circumstances, sort of, in that community, that everything isn't that, that the what we usually think of when we think of of what makes a mother, the sort of warmth and nurturing and caring. Like I think that those things are there, but I think that the reality of living in a place like the kind of place that I'm from and the place that I write about in the book demands a certain strength and a certain savagery of women and of mothers, because I think that that often the women sort of in that community. I mean, this wasn't the case in the book, but I think as far as that culture is concerned, like often the women are the ones, like I said, they hold the family together, but often they're the ones that are supporting the family, so they are, doing all of the work and bringing in all of the money, like they're the breadwinners. And then at the same time, then they also have to, they have to think about what it means to not only like be black in the South, but to bear and raise black children in the South. And I think that, whether they're, sort of, black young women or black young men, I mean, I think that's complicated, and I think that often that means that, that mothers and that women in the South, that they have to teach their children really hard lessons in order to prepare them for life, outside of the family, in the public, in this place where, racism and inequality has been, is so ingrained in the culture, So I think that place demands a certain savagery.
Well, while we're on the motherhood and womanhood, let's talk a bit about Medea, the myth of Medea, and Jason and the Argonauts, which is sort of Escher's touchstone throughout. She's reading this book of Greek mythology. Why did you introduce that into the novel? Why did you have her doing that? And also, I've read you say some interesting things about what you believe is the need for African American writers to embrace those sort of defining myths of Western civilization.
So I use that myth because because I knew that that she was going to have to that she had to look in unexpected places for these models, right? Models of womanhood and of motherhood, right? And so I'd read these myths, Edith Hamilton's Mythology, when I was younger, and I remember being impressed by the way that those myths, and I'd read like other books containing like fairy tales and myths when I was younger too, and I remember being impressed with the way that specifically those myths in Edith Hamilton's Mythology, that there were many sort of strong, sort of vital women, characters that were women, and so I thought, well, it would be fruitful to have her sort of reading this book, because she'd have all these, all these models, as far as, relationships and women and mothers. But then even at the, at the beginning, when I decided, that she should be reading this book, I didn't know that the myth of Medea and Jason and the Argonauts would figure as prominently as it did until I was sort of reading the book to see, to reacquaint myself with it, and then I came across that myth. And then when I saw the myth of Medea, and then actually, and read it all the way through and saw that, that she loved, the way that she loved Jason, and the way that she's sort of forsaken her family to follow him, and then how she's, like how there's some versions of the myth that say that she slew her own brother, and then chopped him into pieces to slow her father down, who is attempting to catch up with them, and in this. By
throwing the pieces into the water.
Yeah, by throwing the pieces into the water, and so that the father had to stop and pick up every piece of his son, and that's not even it, Then she had children with Jason, and then when he sort of forsakes her in the end, and is going to marry Princess instead, then she kills them. And I, she's such a complicated, commanding, figure, that I thought, this is perfect. Of course Esch would be drawn to this myth, of course, because there's so much, it's so fruitful, there's so much going on there, that I thought, of course. I mean, she's going to see so much of herself in this, in this myth. She's going to see some of China in this myth. She's going to see some of the hurricane in this myth. And so it was really lucky, I think, that that I was reading through the book and that I came across that.
As we were saying, you've also said that you think it's important for African American writers to.
Yeah, I forgot the second part of the question.
That's
I do think it's important for African American writers to embrace, embrace these different aspects of Western culture and Western civilization, because I think that it's making a statement. Because I think it's very easy, at least in the United States, for African American writers to be marginalized, and for our experiences and the experiences of the characters that we're writing about, African American characters, the characters of color, for those experiences to be considered other, by people in the industry, by readers sometimes, and I think that, by using this myth, that hopefully that I was counteracting some of those expectations and saying no, actually, and asserting the fact that, I'm part of this culture as well, and I'm part of I can claim this tradition as my, as for myself as well, and so I'm hoping that that's what's happening in the book, and that using the myth sort of does that and counteracts some of that, tendency that I think that others, when they see African American literature, that they, that they have that tendency to just, oh, I'm not interested in that. It's not about people like me. Yes, it is about, people like you, and yes, it is about your culture, and yes, it is about, it's about human beings.
And certain universal themes, like the survivor is a universal theme.
Exactly. Yeah. That was really important to me in this book. I mean, I think that, it's part of the reason that I settled on the title on the title "Salvage the Bones," because I wanted to, with that title, I wanted to invoke this idea that, that those people, people in these communities, in these like small rural communities, that's what they do every day. They salvage the bones of their lives, whether it's through, after large tragedies like Katrina, or large personal tragedies like the death of the mother, or even like smaller everyday tragedies like not being able to put enough food in the house. And, they salvage the bones of what they have, and they survive, and they live. And so, that was very important, to me. And it was very important that I feel like that I would, signal that to readers, that this is what this is about. This is about survival, which is that's a human thing. It's not specific to one group or another. That's a universal.
As we mentioned at the start, this novel, your second novel, won the National Book Award in the fiction category, which is one of the most prestigious literary prizes in the United States. And congratulations.
Thank you.
But it came as a shock, didn't it?
Yes, it did. When you're nominated for the National Book Award, what they do is they call you and then they email you, right? And so when they called me, but they didn't have my personal information. I guess they searched me out on the internet, and so they had actually sort of called my work number at the university that I teach at, and then emailed me at that address again when they couldn't get in contact with me. So when I saw the email in my inbox, I thought, I thought it was a joke. Like, I thought it was a joke that one of my friends was playing on me, because years ago, one of my friends sent me this email, and they pretended like it was from Prince, and I was very excited, that Prince had emailed me out of nowhere. And so, but I was burned by that experience, right? And so when I saw this email, I thought, this can't be, this is a joke. Somebody's playing a joke on me. And so then I looked up the name of the person that it was sent from, who's, Harold Augenbraum, and he's like the director of the National Book Foundation. And so I looked him up and read, a lot of stuff that I could find on him, interviews, articles, and then realized that he was a real person. So I thought, okay, I'm just gonna call this number back. I'm gonna see what they want. But even then, I told myself, this has nothing to do with the National Book Award. That, what he probably wants you to do is he wants you to submit maybe a short story to this literary magazine that he's involved with. And so I called his office, and then he wasn't there, and I actually spoke to a woman. And she said, congratulations, you're a finalist for the National Book Award. But then she said, you can't tell anybody. You can't tell the publisher, you can't tell your family members, you can't tell anybody, because everyone will find out when we do the big public announcement, right? And then she asked me for all my personal information. So then I thought, this is an identity fraud scam. Like, these people are gonna steal my identity. And so yeah, so so I believe that was, was happening until I actually saw the public announcement, by webcast, and they announced my name. And of course, my name was the last one that was called, because my last name is Ward, and they announced fiction last. So yeah, I didn't believe I was even nominated until I was a finalist, until that happened. And then I was convinced that I wouldn't that I wouldn't win. I thought there's no way on earth that I'm going to win this. So I know, going to this ceremony that, I should just be happy for whoever wins, and it won't be me, but I'm going to be happy for that person. I'm going to clap, and it's going to be good. And then that didn't happen. And then I won, and I didn't realize that, they called my name, and I just sat there. I covered my face with my hands, and I sat there very still and looked down like this. And then my publicist jumped up and grabbed me by the shoulders and shook me and screamed my name. And I thought, oh God, I really did win, and now I have to walk up to the stage and attempt not to fall, and I have to give this speech, and and then I wandered off the wrong side of the stage after I won. It was a shock. All of it was a shock.
And then, of course, you get to come to Sydney as well.
Yes, I get to come to Sydney.
Okay, well, time has flown. It's been so enjoyable. So what we'll do now is take some questions from the audience. Now, we have a roving microphone, so please just wait till it arrives. Gentleman at the front.
I think one of the phenomena in American culture today is what I would call celebrity philanthropy. People like Sean Penn, George Clooney. But the particular case I want to mention, because it's reference to Katrina, is I believe Brad Pitt has adopted a particular area of that. What I want to find out is, what is your reaction to celebrities adopting these type of projects?
I think that actually that it's a good thing, because I think that after, after Hurricane Katrina, that there were, no one was, I feel like no one was saying anything, I mean, no one was, and I didn't have the kind of, media power, and no one that I knew did, to speak out and really talk about what was occurring, and about the fact that, that people were being neglected, and that part of the reason that we thought they were being sort of neglected and made victims in a certain respect is because they were black, and because they were poor, because they had no power. And so I, I know that, I appreciated it, and I feel like, I've spoken to members of my family about it and people in my community about it. Like, we appreciate it when people that do have that power, right, to bring attention to a cause, when they speak up and say something and then actually do it. I mean, I've actually driven past, you can drive past the apartment buildings and the houses that he's actually developing, because they're actually right next to the interstate that you take when you're driving into New Orleans. So when you're driving through New Orleans East, you can see them there. When you're heading towards the downtown, you can see them there on the left. And I especially appreciate what he's done, because it's not like, the storm occurred and then he said something and then he did nothing. That's the exact opposite of what's happened. I mean, he's actually, he said that he was going to do something, and he actually did it. I mean, those apartments are there. They're still not completed, but they're working on them. They've, the buildings have been erected, and he's following through. So, we appreciate that, because it's I think it's hard to come by.
Thank you very much for telling us about your wonderful book.
Thank you.
I'm curious, there's so many wonderful, passionate words that you used today about the savagery of your book and about Medea, that extraordinary and violent myth. Mm-hmm. How does the book world respond to you as an African-American and as a woman, mm-hmm. to minorities? Mm-hmm. I'm curious to see whether or not you've been branded political yet, and how you place yourself in that world.
Funny, I mean, maybe I'm too close to it to see it, too close to the situation to see it, but I don't think I've been branded political, like a political figure yet. And maybe part of the reason is because I think if you read the book, you wouldn't think, as you read it, oh, this is making a political statement, because it is very much like invested in being in being like a work of literature, right? But I mean, who knows? I've done events like this in the United States, and now sort of around the world, and I am, I think, saying things that that might sort of cast me as a political figure, and that's fine, because I believe in what I'm saying, and I believe in what I'm doing, and I feel a real sense of responsibility to write about the people that I write about. So if that happens, then that's great. But I mean, so far I don't think that it is happening. Yeah.
Thank you. Any further questions?
The rich white girls that you went to school with, have you had any response, personal communications, for example, from them or girls like them, people like them?
I have actually. I mean, I've had my sort of book launch at home was at the local library, the Pasquershane Library, that had just been rebuilt, and it's only been rebuilt. I think maybe it was rebuilt last year, so it's been 7 years, and it took them that long to rebuild it. And so that's where I, had my book launch at home, and there were a couple people that I went to school with, and teachers actually, some of my ex-teachers from that school that came, and they're just, they're proud of what I've done, and of my, I guess of my success. I don't exactly know. I don't know it, because the book that I'm working on now, which is my memoir, there's a section in it, there's a chapter in it where I do write a lot about my experiences in high school, and largely about the negative ones. I mean, I do say that I had plenty of positive experiences, and I had lots of friends there, which I did. But then again, like, these things happen, and I have to speak about them. So I don't know what's going to happen when that book comes out next fall and they read it. I don't know what will happen then, and I don't know what kind of feedback that I'll get. But I figure I have to be somewhat fearless about these things, because I'm committed to telling the truth. And if I am, I mean, I have to face the consequences of my actions. But I'm hoping that my account of what occurred during those years will be honest, but that it'll be even-handed, and that I won't pass judgment on those people, because I think that that would be problematic if I pass judgment. But I'm hoping that if I don't pass judgment, that that there won't be too much fallout.
Well, let's hope we're back here in 12 months talking about
Yeah.
it. I think we can squeeze in one more. Any final question from anybody?
Jesmyn, just a compliment, a nurturing compliment from a mother. I really enjoyed your book. I describe it as being really raw. As an animal lover, I identified with Skeeter, and I love the way that he, as hard as it was, the way he was prepared to put his dog at risk to send his brother off to baseball camp because his father didn't cope too well with life. And coming from a working class background, I can identify with a lot of what you've been through, and go girl.
Thank you.
Thanks very much.
This is Big Ideas from the ABC.